Hello, I invite you to join me as I begin a series dedicated to the calendars of the ancient Mesoamerican civilizations. And by Mesoamerican, I'm talking about the region between Central America and a good part of southern Mexico. These included the Aztec, Maya, Olmec, and other important civilizations that flourished in this region from as early as 1000 BC. This series will be looking at several themes, one major theme per episode, that will explore four basic questions that I would like to develop in order to explain what the calendar systems were about. And so the four questions that come to mind are, where did these calendars come from? How did they work? How were they used? And I would say most importantly, how do we know? Because it is through this question especially that we can dispel many of the myths and misunderstandings about the ways in which the Maya, the Aztec, and other civilizations used these calendars, and to an extent, some of their descendants continue to use into the present day. So I look forward to talking about these ideas as we begin this series, and I look forward to the new episodes that are to come. In the beginning, the gods created space by separating land from sky. For space to exist in any meaningful way, the gods created time. They pieced it out into strands of different lengths, then wove them into the cosmic basket. For over 2,000 years, Mesoamerican peoples of Mexico and Central America regarded time as sacred. While every civilization had a solar year of 365 days, and some left evidence of efforts to handle leap year, they also measured time in cycles independent of natural patterns, and that is the subject of this playlist. Time was like a spiral basket. Its units were cyclical, their patterns and features expected to regularly and endlessly repeat. Mesoamerican peoples made sense of mythical time by mapping it against historic events and natural rhythms. The calendars charted out the presence of spiritual forces in the natural world, whose various powers spread across different units of time. Such powers claimed influence upon matters as varied as weather, land, politics, character, and health. Among the most basic and common units of the ancient calendar was the 20-day month. Each day within this round had a unique sign with its own symbolic, even mystical qualities. With few exceptions, every major Mesoamerican civilization had a way to distinguish their 20 days through icons. They inscribed these day signs upon wood, stone, and sheet, most famously within books or codices that this playlist will dedicate a whole episode to. Because the Maya and the Aztec left just so much material about their calendars, theirs are the best studied, and so I will be referencing them most in this playlist. We will look at the systems built upon the Maya 360-day tun and the 260-day cycle that the Maya called Tzolkin and the Aztecs called Tonalpowali. Where did they come from? The next video will look into the possible origins of these Native American calendar systems in Mexico and Central America. It will also show some of their earliest expressions emerging over 2,000 years ago. When the Spanish were colonizing the Aztec capital at what is now Mexico City, historians tried to compare the native society and culture to instances from the Old World, familiar colors through foreign palettes, alien images filtered through stained glass. The Aztec canals recalled Venetian waterways, the major gods resembled Greek mythology, and the mythical calendar echoed European astrology. The Spanish deemed the Mexican horoscope of lesser scientific quality than the European counterpart because, they argued, at least the latter came from regular observations of the planets. That is to say, the Spanish believed that their own astrology was more convincing because it was at least based on natural movements. This was supposedly unlike the Aztec zodiac, whose reliance on sets of numbers made the whole system look artificial and so unreliable. Nowadays, anthropologists know that colonial bias couldn't be further from the truth, and I will use these approaches in today's episode on the beginnings of the mythical calendar in Mesoamerica. This calendar did indeed follow natural patterns gleaned by ancient skywatchers, just with extra steps, even literally. Cosmic bodies were gods crossing the sky by their own footpaths. Especially important to the origins of the calendar were the Sun, Mars, and Venus. In this panel from the Codex Borgia, the Venus god appears as a fierce and terrible warrior, taking 5 forms and striking different targets with his spear, depending which sequence of days mark his position. A planet's synodic period is the cycle of its path as observed from Earth. It will differ from the planet's actual year because it also includes Earth's revolutions, but synodic periods are regular enough to chart. Mesoamerican astronomers believe that this regularity was another of the many designs by which to measure the presence of sacred forces in the world. Ancient priests combined them to produce the calendar. The Venusian synodic period is 584 days. Multiplying this number by 65 yields 37,960 days. Using a math term, this is a lowest common multiple, with days counted from the solar year, the Martian period, and the 260-day mythical calendar itself. 37,960 was 104 solar years, assuming 365 days each. For just an aside, the Aztec and Maya did understand leap year, and they tried different ways to clean up the mess that it made. 104 is also twice 52 years, an important cycle for the Aztecs that I will explain in the video on the calendar's ritual uses. This multiple is also the product of 146 times 260, the length of the mythical calendar round. And lastly, the Martian period has 780 days, itself a multiple of 260. If you watched the last video, you may remember the importance of the 20-day month, which many cultures combined with sets of 13 to produce the 260-day count. It was possible, for example, to name a day by a number from 1 to 13 and one of the 20 signs. I will unpack the meaning of this ritual cycle in the next video, which will look at how the Maya picked up the calendars. We are looking now at where and when they first appeared in Mesoamerica. To talk about the origins of the Mesoamerican culture area, we almost always consider the Olmec, who flourished between 1200 and 400 BC. The Olmec were not the only civilization of this period, but they became the most influential in the development of culture and society. I have highlighted the region in yellow, humid wetlands along the south coast of the Gulf of Mexico. The purple dot marks Tres Zapotes, an Olmec site that lasted for centuries after its contemporaries. From this site hails a stone monument broken into two parts. Read together, the 5 bar and dot numbers of this long count date represent a day from the year 31 BC. A similar sequence was recently found at Chiapa de Corzo in the Mexican state of Chiapas. Just a few years earlier, with a date of 36 BC, it is the earliest known long count date, if not the oldest recorded date in the New World. On the last embers of the Olmec civilization sparked new cultures looking to keep the old flames alive. From west of the Olmec crescent rose a distinct society called the Epi-Olmec, literally after the Olmec, to follow them in both time and culture. The red dot at west marks La Mojarra, the site of a monument illustrating efforts to continue Olmec ideas and techniques. The La Mojarra stele displays a royal profile at left, and at right an impressive text written in glyphs. We will zoom into a part of the inscription featuring two dating systems, one above the other, a month sign and then a long count date. They appear in the highlighted column. These texts were written in combined sequences of top to bottom and left to right, and so that is how we will read these figures. First is a knotted serpent perched atop a layered platform. This is a glyph marking the 20-day month in which the long count date fell. Below begins the long count, with 3 dots over a 5 bar to count 8 for the longest unit of time. Next is a single bar for 5. The third position has 3 bars and a dot. 3 times 5 plus 1 dot makes 16. The fourth number has a bar and 4 dots. 5 plus 4 makes 9. And the fifth and final number has 1 bar and 2 dots for 7. The full sequence may be read as 8, 5, 16, 9, 7. The next video will explain how this works. An older reading of this date pointed to a day in the year 169 AD, but recent studies suggest earlier, by the year 156. While controversy continues over how to read these glyphs, one study of the text presents a couple important ideas. 1. The king exercised spiritual power during a solar eclipse. 2. The power invoked the king's Nahual, a companion spirit usually in the guise of a wild animal. This is a seminal concept in Native American shamanism, the subject for another video. Calendars therefore emerged in southern Mexico as a way to record the feats of kings and queens, often with reference to cosmic events. The dancing of gods in the sky revealed mythical episodes, which in turn added weight to political matters. Scribes poured together the royal, the celestial, and the mythical in their stories, and the calendar funneled the flow. Join me for the next episode as I show how the Maya would pick up these calendar traditions and make them blossom. I will explain how the Maya developed the 260-day and long count systems, best known for the turning of a major cycle in 2012. Hello! If you are here from the last video in the calendars playlist, you may remember how we ended it on notes about the Epi-Olmec civilization from the southern Gulf of Mexico. Their stone sculptures had long count dates from the middle of the 2nd century AD. 200 years later, the Maya of southeast Mexico and northern Central America would start using the calendars in their art. And once they did, they were putting it on everything: jewelry, ceramics, stone, buildings, wood, and their so-called books or codices. For the next 600 years, recording dates became so important to the Maya that archaeologists even use it as one of the cutoffs for the Classic period. This is to say, shortly after the year 900, the Maya stopped carving long count dates on their buildings and monuments, one of several major culture changes that happened during the shift to the post-Classic period. This episode in the Calendars of Ancient Mexico playlist will explore how the Maya braided 3 distinct calendar counting systems in their art and philosophy, with works from the Classic period. They will include pieces including all 3 calendars in the same text, to show how the ancient Maya fitted them to unique points in time. Before stepping too far ahead into the mythical calendar, I should point out that ancient Mesoamerican cultures were aware of the 365-day solar year. It was one of the 3 counting systems the Maya used most. The Hab had 18 months, each with an identifying glyph, then a leftover 5 days called Wayeb. This produces the familiar 365-day count. The Tzolk'in was an important system with mythical aspects, and I will talk about it later in this episode. For now, notice that its 260-day count is also a product of 20. Most celebrated of all, from past to present, is the long count, which uses counts of 20 to produce larger and larger units of time. Notice how all 3 rely on units of 20. 20 is the base of the vigesimal counting systems used in native Mesoamerican languages. A quick puzzle. In many Mayan languages, the word for 20 was the same for human. Why? What do most humans have 20 of? If you answered fingers and toes, you are correct. Because of how central the long count is in Maya concepts of time, I will now turn to unpacking how it worked. Stele 26 of Huaxactún from North Guatemala is an excellently intact example of how the Maya could write all 3 calendars together into a single text. It follows a standard pattern of long count, then the 260-day Tzolk'in sign, and finally the numeric position in the month for the solar year. You may remember from the previous video that Mesoamerican scribes wrote glyphs in combinations of top-down and left-right directions, so that is the order we will take. The first figure to notice is the large oval, highlighted at top. This is a tun glyph, saying, start reading the long count date from here. The first glyph in this long count sequence marks the unit of time called the Baktun, the longest of the first 5 digits. It measured a count of 144,000 days. Notice the 4 dots and vertical bar to its left. The bar stands for 5, and each dot represents 1. 1 bar and 4 dots makes 9, so this glyph tells us to multiply 144,000 times 9 for the first digit. The second glyph marks the Katun, the unit of 7,200 days. It is a little less than 2 decades, and the Maya often timed political milestones to its turning. Notice the lobe symbol on the left. This is a sign for 0, and the Maya were in fact the first culture in the New World to invent the mathematical concept. Next comes the Tun, the 360-day count. To its left are 2 bars of 5 each, showing that this unit is being counted 10 times. 360 is a product of 18 times 20, the 20 days of the Winal. This date counts 0 Winal. And the most basic unit of the long count is the individual day, or kin, after the word for sun, also 0 here. Every instance of the long count date used at least these first 5 digits. Next is the Tzolkin date, the number and sign from the 260-day mythical calendar, 7 Ahau, or Lord. Finally, the register in the solar year, the 4th day in the month of Yash, for the Maya started counting a month's days from 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, the 4th day. Archaeologists write out the full long count by the 5 digits, 9, 0, 10, 0, 0. Here's how they add up. 9 times 144,000, the length of the Baktun, produces 1,296,000 days. 0 Katun counts 0 days. 10 times 360 days per tun yields 3,600 days. 0 Winal, 0 days. 0 Kin, 0 days. This many days had passed since the long count commenced. What was the long count starting from? The beginning of the current cosmic age, August 11th, 3114 BC, whose long count date was 130000. Adding the non-zero numbers brings, since that mythical moment, a total of 1,299,600 days, October 16th, 445 AD. The Tzolkin and month glyphs also match these exact dates. These are the principles that guide the most famous artifact of Maya culture, the 2012 event. From the Gulf Coast state of Tabasco, the site of Tortuguero left the only known glyphic text describing any event for the 2012 milestone. It concerns the turning of the 13th Baktun on December 21st, 2012. The long count date returned to 130000, the same date I mentioned earlier for the beginning of the current age. The Maya never said the calendar or the world would end in 2012. It just marked the end of the 13th Baktun cycle since 3114 BC. In fact, some Maya dates had even larger units. They extend the long count by multiples of 20, which we saw for the smaller cycles. 20 Baktun formed a unit of 2,880,000 days that archaeologists call peak tun. Following this pattern, the Kalabtun had 57,600,000 days. Multiplying times 20 again yielded the Kinkiltun with 1,152,000,000 days. And the last of these massive periods was the Alautun, whose 23,040,000,000 days ran over 63 million years, which in geological time marked the end of the dinosaurs. These 4 mega units are very rare in Maya timekeeping, and they are not the original names, but rather coined by archaeologists. This detail from the Tortuguero text predicts the 2012 date. The first glyph I've highlighted has 3 dots and 2 bars. What is 2 times 5 plus 3? 13 is correct. This passage tells of the turning of the 13th Baktun on the date of 4 Ahau, 3 Kankin. Remember that we start from 0 for months, so this is the 4th day. While the rest of this section is broken and worn, it mentions a Maya god related to the night cycles. And that is all the ancient Maya ever said about December 21st, 2012. They clearly weren't expecting us to go anywhere. In the previous video, I discussed how planetary observations inspired the mythical calendar's 260 days. 260 is a product of 2 cycles, a numeric count from 1 to 13, running with 20 days, each identified with a unique glyph and following a precise order. The same sign would always appear 20 days later, and the Maya used this rule to plan for astronomical, ritual, and political events. Tzolkin means order of days, in reference to its fixed cycle. The oldest uses for the Tzolkin were 3. 1. To link dates in the solar year to those of mythical cycles. 2. To name each solar year by the number and sign of its first day. And 3. To identify long count units of time by the number attached to the last day. Remember that the long count is built of multiples of 20, so its cycles would always end on the same sign, a Hau or Lord. The numbers would cycle through regularly. One possible analogy might be something like, instead of saying the 2020s, we would call it, quote, the decade ending when December 31st is a Tuesday, unquote. Each sign had its own spiritual qualities. Each number had its own spiritual qualities. How did the ancient Maya list these qualities? The texts actually say very little about what the individual signs and numbers meant. We know much more about them from sources after the conquest, from colonial documents to modern rituals. I will address ritual aspects of the 260-day calendar in later episodes in this playlist. To begin looking at mystical aspects of the 260-day calendar, the next episode will turn us to the other Mesoamerican civilization famous for using it. I will see you again to start looking at how the Aztecs brought mythology into their calendars. Hello, this episode continues the Calendars of Ancient Mexico playlist as we look at ideas from the Aztecs and the Central Mexican highlands. In previous episodes, we learned how the first calendars were developed from number systems and planetary movements, then how the Maya combined 3 separate counts to record precise dates. Examining the art and text from the 2 centuries before and after the conquest reveals details about the spiritual forces that guided how native Mesoamericans believed patterns of time could affect nature and people. Much like the classic period Maya from the last video, the Aztecs and other societies of central Mexico followed multiple sequences of time, each with its own rhythms, fortunes, and omens. Indeed, this episode will start making time's mystical aspects a central theme for this playlist, one that will matter for the rest of the series. Shortly after the year 900, the Maya stopped using the long count date on their monuments, but they would continue to use glyphs and numbers to mark their dates. This episode takes us 5 centuries from the end of the classic period, shifting us to the year 1400, the latter stages of the post-classic. The area we are visiting covers the Aztec capital in the so-called Mixteca Puebla region to its southeast. In prior parts of this playlist, I mentioned a 260-day calendar distinct to the ancient Mesoamerican culture area. It comes from the combination of the numbers from 1 to 13 and a fixed sequence of 20 signs. If you are continuing from the last video on the Maya calendars, you may remember that the ancient Maya called this mythical calendar Tzolkin, ordered days. 500 years later, the Aztecs would continue to observe this special sequence. They called it Tonalpohualli, count of days. It is derived from Tona, the sunlight cast upon the new birth. Presenting all 260 number sign combinations in their proper course, these 2 pages come from the Florentine Codex, a colonial document produced by Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagún in the late 16th century. Although the full count of 260 does appear in codices made before the conquest, this version cleanly condenses it to 2 pages, running left to right. It begins with a date marked by the number 1 and the sign for caiman, a relative of alligators. The next date is 2 wind, then 3 house, and so on until 13 reed. Once this row is done, the signs continue in sequence with jaguar, but the number count reverts to 1. Next come 2 eagle, 3 vulture, and so forth. Notice that the sign of caiman, with which we began the round, returns in this new row, but now with the number 8. Wind's number is 9. After every time the 13th step ends, the number returns to 1. Every possible combination of number and sign happens just once through the full cycle, which concludes with the date of 13 flower. After this day ends, the round returns to 1 caiman to start the sequence all over again. Because it was shorter than the 365-day solar year, the count of days could have dates occurring twice within the same year. These 2 series ran independently, but they were expected to coincide every 52 years, for which the Aztecs performed an important ritual we will look at later in this playlist. Beginning with the Aztecs, we have an abundant lore on how the calendars could mystically affect nature, society, and the individual. They acted like a horoscope, with distinct numbers, signs, years, and other periods imposing a variety of effects upon the person and their environment. These pages come from Book 4 of the Colonial Florentine Codex. At left appear two images related to the calendar. The upper frame depicts the site of storm, represented by billows of water pouring from a cloud, and the number 1, marked with a single red dot atop. This therefore depicts the date of one storm. The picture below shows the descent of two ghostly figures called Siwa Pipiltin, the spirits of women who died giving birth. The Aztecs believed that one storm was a date when they would descend from the western skies to afflict women and children, whom they envied for surviving. The Nahuatl text describes that, because of the already negative energies the date one storm could bring, people born on this day risked becoming practitioners of black magic, even the power to turn into animals, but living in poverty. At right are two images showing a conversation over such a newborn infant. Notice in the lower scene the caiman head and 3 dots atop. The third step in this count was of better fortune than one storm, so parents would benefit to wait 2 days from then to bathe and bless the baby, improving the child's life course under the energies of a more favorable date. In my Aztec Magic and Occultism playlist, I have a more detailed discussion of how one's birthday could guide their destiny in the Aztec world. I talk further about Book 4 of Sahagun's Florentine Codex, from which the past two screenshots hail. This passage brings us to a foundation to the mythical calendar. Spiritual beings regulated the flow of energies and outcomes by sitting along the calendar stations. Most of these were gods. The codices from central Mexico intricately depict gods presiding over intervals of the sacred calendars. In the selection from the Codex Borgia, the first day is in the lower right corner, with a deer's head for the sign of deer. The central figure is the rain god, best known as Tlaloc. At left is the next sign, with a rabbit's head, and Mayawel, goddess of the maguey plant. The day signs run from lower right to left, then from upper left to right, ending this part with the sign of jaguar, accompanied by Tlatzolteotl, a major fertility goddess. In some cases, the presiding deity is named after a combination of number and sign, during whose date they could be especially powerful, according to Alfredo Lopez-Austin. The Aztecs worshipped gods with calendar names such as Ticomecowatl, 7 serpent, Maquilxochitl, 5 flower, and Ometochtli, 2 rabbit. Notice the dots and rabbit marking the emblem upon his chest. The Central Mexican codices most commonly mapped the order of deities as they governed each of the 20 days or 9 nights. Also, another important dimension was a 13-day count, each with its own presiding god or two. Only in central Mexico is there such attention to this unit of time. Neither the Maya nor the Mixtec gave it similar importance. The Aztecs even had a term for the 13-day count, Ma'tlactetl Omeyi Tonalpowali, count of days by 13. Researchers today use the simpler phrase trecena, from trece, 13 in Spanish. Named for the first day in the count, each trecena also had its own influential qualities upon all 13 days. This image comes from the Codex Telleriano Remensis. Notice the first sign at upper left, one monkey, for which the count is named. The main figure is Patecatl, a god of medicine. Friar Sahagun remarked that a person born on one monkey was destined to receive the monkey's qualities. A playful, expressive fellow with good prospects of becoming an artist or entertainer. The next sign, 2 twisted grass, was not so favorable, for the number and sign were rooted in futility. 3 reed, on the other hand, was a preferable sign. We can see from these cases that at least 3 different cycles weighed upon the destiny assigned a person's birth. The number, the sign, and the 13-day count in which it was uniquely positioned. Yet the Aztecs said that nothing was necessarily fated. They understood that one's choices and efforts also guided their life's course, in alignment with or in spite of the path they've been handed. The next episode will take a closer look at the codices that are among our most important sources on the ancient calendar traditions. Please come back for details on these valuable works from the Aztec, Maya, Mixtec, and related cultures of the 15th and 16th centuries. Since the first episodes of this playlist on the calendars of ancient Mexico, I have talked about codices. Here and there I have also shared spectacular, colorful selections from these ancient manuscripts to show the imaginative ways native Mesoamericans brought the calendar into their art and thought. Then what are codices? In the ancient Mesoamerican world, a codex was a text painted upon a long sheet, typically made from deerskin or bark paper. The even folds made sure that every page was roughly the same size, so that it could be neatly folded after reading. They were like books, and indeed during the colonial period, both native and Spanish historians compared codices to books because of their similar shapes and contents. Several plates could be opened and read together as a single unit, depending how long the section ran. Only specialized scribes could prepare the art for these manuscripts. You may have already noticed that much of the text so far is in pictures and symbols, whose meanings were specific and standard enough to count as writing. In fact, in many ancient Mesoamerican languages, painting and writing often blurred into a single concept. The Aztec Tlacuilo and the Maya Atzib were artists who preserved cultural ideas upon these pictorial works. Every codex before the conquest used at least one calendar system, especially the 260-day mythical calendar I detailed in this playlist last episode. This video will visit the three major regions that produce codices, each using the mythical calendar in distinct ways. In the yellow region is the Maya civilization, whose scribes employed the 260-day calendar to chart astronomical events. In the purple region of western Oaxaca are the Mixtec, who cited the calendar to tell history. And in red are the Aztec and Cholula cultures of central Mexico, where they painted elaborate calendars to measure the rhythms of sacred presence. The Maya were among the most precise astronomers of their time. They charted the moon's path to the minute, and they were following other celestial courses with literally religious attention. Because native gods populated the ancient codices, during the colonial period the church condemned these works as idolatry, leading unfortunately to burning or losing many of them, perhaps in the hundreds. The Maya codices that have survived from before the conquest are only 4. All 4 are planetary almanacs, predicting heavenly movements such as lunar eclipses and Venus periods. Interspersed among the pages of the Maya codices are mythical scenes and god profiles. Glyphs clarify gods and events, such as in this section from the Dresden Codex. Gods are making fires by spitting drills into day glyphs, dividing the 260-day calendar, tzolkin in Maya, into shorter spans of days. Each set has positive or negative influences, depending on the section in which gods are present within. At left is a fabulous rendition of a 2-headed crocodile, similar to Maya myths of 2-headed serpents arching beneath the sky. Urging from the main face, pointing left, is the creator god Itzamnach, reminding us of the calendar's cosmic quality. In the description, I have posted a link to an article by Edwin Barnhart for more details on this richly illustrated text. The Maya codices are windows in the observatory, through which to peer into the spirit worlds of the Maya sky. Among the forested highlands of western Oaxaca, the Mixtec peoples were also creating works of exquisite painting and text, but in a different manner and for different purposes than their Maya peers to the east. The Mixtec codices were royal histories, the feats of kings and queens. If you watched the last video, you may remember how the 260-day mythical calendar acted like a horoscope, bringing a variety of influences upon the person born on a distinct combination of 13 numbers and 20 signs. The Mixtec people also used these calendar signs to name the royal newborns. Their codices recount the adventures and conquests of King 8 Deer, King 4 Wind, Queen 6 Monkey, and other nobles identified by the number sign combination. This facsimile of the Vienna Codex is on display at the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City. I must apologize in advance for reading this in the opposite direction from the actual right to left order. Notice the red bars that neatly separate the images in a narrative effect similar to a zigzag, giving the story a waving up and down rhythm. Unique combinations of colors and symbols label villages, mountains, temples, and other landmarks of the ancient Mixtec world. At the right end of this sequence are groups of nobles, each identified by the count of dots and calendar sign that fell upon his or her birthday. Artists attached year symbols to calendar signs to indicate the years in which the rulers acted, mainly during the 11th to 12th centuries. An example appears at upper left in this plate from the Codex Columbinus Becker. Queen Six Monkey is spatially and socially the central figure in this historical painting. Here she plays the ritual ball game, a subject for another video. The codices of the central Mexican highlands have a place in my heart because I have taught so much through them. A trove of knowledge about the spiritual influences in the 260-day calendar opens with each unfolding of the plates. Composed by Aztec painters shortly after the conquest, the Codex Borbonicus uses vibrant imagery to illuminate the gods of the 260-day count and the festivals of the 365-day year. Already in each of these two plates, we can see 3 separate cycles of time running in parallel: 9 nights, 13 numerals, and the 13-day count that contains them. In length and space, the largest of the 3 is the 13-day trecena, which I introduced in the last video on the Aztec calendar. The large field at upper left portrays the gods or goddesses for each of these 13-day periods, and in the smaller rows appear the gods stationed along the 9 nights and the 13 numerals. The night gods appear to the right of each day sign, and the gods of the 13 numbers have their own spaces, shared with a companion bird or butterfly. Some codices were entirely dedicated to elucidating the calendar. In the last video, I introduced the Aztec word for the 260-day calendar, Tonalpohualli, count of days. They had a similar word for codices dedicated to the calendar. Tonal-Amatl means sheet of days. This is the Alban Tonal-Amatl, whose each plate depicts a full trecena. Much like the Borbonicus images in the last scene, the panels highlight the sequences of signs, numbers, and their attending gods along the 9 nights, 13 numerals, and individual trecenas. Much like the Maya examples, the codices of central Mexico detailed the supernatural forces that pulled on the flow of days in the mythical calendar. The Codex Borgia and related manuscripts are filled with tables depicting the numerous ways that gods drove the calendar and the calendar drove the world. This plate from the Codex Borgia divides the 20 signs among the cardinal directions, each with a central god or goddess. The signs have positions in both time and space, and the Borgia tells much on this aspect of the calendar. I claim that the Borgia is the most encyclopedic native work on the nature of the mythical calendar. In this episode and previously, we have seen other subjects in this manuscript. They include mythical narratives, ritual instructions, temple scenes, and even a fascinating table of wedding fortunes. I described the Codex Borgia's wedding table further in the upcoming episode on rituals for the sacred calendar. The next episode in our playlist on the Mesoamerican calendars looks at their most famous and colossal expression, the Aztec calendar stone. Please return to explore the intricate symbolism in this ancient Native American masterpiece. The Aztec calendar stone is not only the most recognized monument to the Mesoamerican calendar, but also history's most iconic work of Native American art. With a diameter nearly 12 feet, the calendar stone is packed with the shapes of time and space, as well as the paragons of the Aztec Empire. Aztec artists arranged the figures in elegant radial symmetry that recounts beliefs about the cosmic cycles. Since its discovery at the corner of the Mexico City Cathedral in 1790, this monolithic sculpture has invited conversations over its intricate meanings and functions. Scholars long held that the work was perhaps an altar surface for rites dedicated to the calendar. Today's consensus is that it was meant to be a ritual gladiator platform, but the Aztecs abandoned this purpose because of a deep flaw in the back. This video will look at the several units of time expressed in this single monument, and we will travel inward from the calendar's most basic to most cosmic measurements. Forming the perimeter are 2 massive Xiuhcohuame, the year serpents, descending to meet at the bottom. Long upturned crests carry 7 blinking eyes representing the twinkling stars in the Pleiades cluster, whose position marked the turning of the 52-year Xiuhpohualli cycle, count of years. We will return to this 52-year count, reckoned from the alignment of the solar year and the 260-day sacred calendar, in this playlist next episode on calendar rituals. From the serpent's open mouths emerged the faces of the fire god Xiuhtecuhtli at left, and the sun god Tonatiu on the right. Their tongues ended sacrificial knives, the blood hunger that keeps space-time in flux. Their ultimate touch holds the flow between day and night, the most basic unit of all the calendars. Flames upon the serpents' backs renew the 52-year cycle. The old fire ignites the new. The next rings contain 3 Aztec jewels. Blood makes the seasons turn. Eagle feathers strengthen the empire's army, and jades beautify the world. From this level spring rays of sunlight, 4 major points and 4 cross-quarter arrows. This ring is the most calendric part of the monument. Beginning from the top and running counterclockwise are the 20 signs of the Aztec calendar. The first sign is the head of a caiman, related to the alligator. Next follow wind, house, and all the signs in their fixed order till the flower in the final position. Around the center stand large day signs, each with 4 dots to distinguish 5 dates. 4 jaguar, 4 wind, 4 rain, 4 water, and a 5th sign. Do you see where it is? I will bring back the 20 signs, so you may pause here if you'd like to find it first. The 5th sign is movement. It has a butterfly outline. These are the 5 solar ages in Aztec myth. The gods created and destroyed the world 4 times, each lasting for centuries, with a sun named after the day of its destruction. We now live in the 5th sun, known as 4 movement. Details on this important Aztec myth are for another video. And at center is the sun god, whose daily rhythm set the foundation for every calendar cycle, and whose constant glow preserved worldly existence. The sun was the center of the Aztec spiritual world, which they maintained through rituals paced along the calendar's measures. The next episode in this playlist explores such rituals about the calendar, from ancient times to the present day, so please return for it. The sacred calendar took part in a native Mesoamerican's life from the day of their birth. The first sunlight cast upon the newborn would outline their life's course, sketched by particular marks for their character, career, and even consort. Many Mesoamerican cultures had specialists called daykeepers, trained in esoteric matters of their calendar's many measures. In previous episodes of this playlist, I have explained how the 260-day mythical calendar combined dates from rounds of 13 numbers and 20 signs. In this illustration from the Florentine Codex, a daykeeper is explaining to the newborn's mother the birthday's potential virtues. Friar Sahagun's account reads that the birth date of 10 Rabbit already promised a life of prosperity, given that the rabbit itself was a prolific creature. However, to improve the infant's outcome still further, the daykeeper advised to wait 3 days to ritually wash and name the child. This would bring the even better auspices from the date of 13 Monkey. The number and sign in one's birthday could recommend not only how to live their life, but also with whom. The most vivid example of this idea comes in the form of the Codex Borgia's marriage table, a divining chart that predicts the climate for a couple to wed. Adding the numbers from their dates yields a sum from 2 to 26. Covering all the amounts between 1 plus 1 and 13 plus 13. Each panel shows the male and female figures in scenes that recall mythical characters and episodes. The general rule? Even sums warn of dysfunction, and odd sums promise happier fortune. The evens tend to show pairs with their backs to each other and a dark, starry sky overhead, and the odds display couples sharing their wealth beneath a radiant sun. An especially grotesque case is at bottom right, for the sum of 2. The male at right is represented by the death god and is eating a child, while the wife is cutting a boy's neck. These were not literal readings, but allegorical, signs to watch out for. Immediately above this scene are a seated couple with a sum of 19. They sit on jaguar skin stools and presented incense burner, bloodletting needles, and even a quetzal bird, objects representing wealth and ritual. There are only a few remaining hits that diviners used the signs themselves to prescribe the best couples matches. Diego Duran briefly spoke of good matches between compatible signs among the colonial Aztecs, similar to how some use the astrological zodiac today. Likewise, the colonial Zapotecs could cancel a wedding if a couple's signs didn't fit. An important point I raised in the last video was that the Aztecs believed that the calendar weighed heavy on their natural and social worlds. And yet they did not have a fatalistic view of it. Just as a person could choose what turns to take in their life, the Aztecs and other Mesoamerican peoples believed that ritual could improve or even enhance the powers that the calendar brought into their cosmos. The Aztec and Maya regularly observed calendar rites that affected the political and worldly fortunes for the entire society. Among the largest and most mythical of these was the Aztec ceremony marking the end of a 52-year cycle. In a previous video, I explained how the Aztecs devised this unit of time from the conjunction of the solar year and the 260-day calendar. At cycle's end, Aztec priests would assemble at Chapultepec, the Star Mountain, southeast of the capital in what is today Puebla State. There they awaited the arrival of the Pleiades at the zenith to turn the round. Meanwhile, the entire empire went quiet. The people snuffed their fires, smashed their potteries, secluded pregnant women, and climbed to the rooftops, all to prepare for either the end of the world or the renewal of the age. The priests at Star Mountain made a human sacrifice, and upon his chest they sparked the new fire. Upon their torches they carried the nascent flames to the cities, where the light of redeemed time illuminated the Aztec Empire's skies. Part of this ceremony was the ritual Siuhmolpili, literally tying the years into bundles of 52 sticks, representing the last cycle's years. In this scene from the Codex Borbonicus, Aztec priests cast the bound sticks into a ritual fire to burn away the burdens of past times. Though no longer conducted by formal priesthood, calendar rituals survived conquest. Colonial reports complained about remote communities where people continued to practice native customs, including references to the calendars. During the early 17th century, the secular priest Hernando Ruiz de Alarcón wrote a treatise about southern Aztec rituals, concealed within literally occult names, the symbols and metaphors of their spells. Calendar dates abound in the language to empower ritual objects with mythical forces known from the count of days. A magician could name their traveler's staff after the date one flint knife to make it a formidable weapon. The following verses come from a spell to hunt deer. Tla shiwiki, nonan tlaltecutli, nota se tochtli, tescat san walpocatimani, ma mishko non mayau, ni tlamakaski, ni se teot, ma ni walmish tlapachmana. The date Se Tochtli, one rabbit, recalls Aztec metaphors about deer and rabbits as icons of the wilderness. Here it complements the allusion to the earth goddess in the preceding line. To the specialist with knowledge of the calendar's mystical details, the signs, numbers, and spans among the count of days could carry sacred power. The daykeeper is skilled in bringing this power to those who request it. In modern times, the sacred calendar was still used in rituals among a few pockets around Mexico, such as the native Totonac of Puebla and the Mije of Oaxaca. It is the Maya of southern Guatemala, however, who have most visibly and tenaciously kept their calendar traditions alive. The Quiche and Kaqchikel-Maya called their specialists Achija, the users of days. Their rituals evoke the signs of the Maya calendar in both glyph and word, sight and sound, to apply their qualities toward the matters at hand. Tourists from near and far visit these specialists for consultation and ritual affairs. Some practice in spectacular spaces, such as the Shrine to Mashimon at the Nimpot shopping center in La Antigua. The deity is quite fitting because some accounts tell that Mashimon himself was originally an Achij. He is a complex character and the subject for another video. Since the beginning of this playlist, I have covered ritual aspects of the sacred calendar because they have been present since the beginning of the idea in native Mesoamerica. It is therefore in this spirit that I return to the origins of the calendar for the playlist final video. Join me as I conclude the Calendars of Ancient Mexico playlist with today's mask. Today's mask appears on the priestly figure in the so-called Chapultepec stone. While the scrolling glyphs at left resemble the Isthmian script of Veracruz, the actual text is closer in style and location to the pyramids of Teotihuacan. And while the Stele is often claimed to have an origin from Veracruz, its first reports refer to an area just south of Mexico City. The work is therefore an enigma, with both nearness to and distance from the cultures of the southern Gulf of Mexico. The most similar carving is Stele 5 of Cerro de las Mesas in South Veracruz, also presenting a priestly figure facing left toward a downward scrolling text. Other comparisons include a current of water at right, a massive animal-shaped headdress, and a mask around the mouth with animal features. While the Cerro de las Mesas carving is heavily eroded, imaging has revealed two dates. A long count date of 9-4-14-1-4, and the number and sign of 7 iguana from the 260-day calendar. You may remember how the Maya specialized in combining these two systems. Here they mark the day of August 25th, 528 AD. Although the Chapultepec stone has lost its calendar signs, the parallels between it and the Cerro de las Mesas stele should date it to around that era. I chose to focus on the mask and other details from the former because they are so remarkably intact. This close-up brings out two interesting features on the priest's mask. The first looks like a proboscis, a possible precursor to the famous beak mask worn by the Mexican wind god. And the second is a triad of spots on the cheek, evoking the physical and spiritual powers of the jaguar. The mask situates the priest in a ritual working, just as the original dates situated the calendric moment in which he acted. Please like, share, and subscribe to the Eye of the Serpent channel for updates. Your Patreon support goes toward travel, research, and production. Thank you for watching, and good roads.